Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Robbins, and I am the Program Manager for Disabilities Inclusion at the Union for Reform Judaism. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today for Challenging the Stigma Surrounding Mental Illness, the third call in our Mental Health Learning Opportunities series. For information on the other calls, including the upcoming calls, and the recordings of the previous calls and all of the great resources that accompanied them, please visit disabilitiesinclusion.org. We have all of the webinars listed on there and all of the other information. Today's webinar is being led by Diana McKeeve from Temple Isaiah in Lafayette, California. Temple Isaiah is one of the URJ exemplar congregations, and if your congregation is doing disabilities inclusion work, we would love to hear about it. So please look up the exemplar congregations on disabilitiesinclusion.org. Diana founded Pituach Libenu, the Open Our Heart support group at her congregation. I will let her tell you the story, but in addition to the great success that it's had at her congregation, it has become a resource for the whole community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diana. And one other thing, this webinar is being live captioned. If you would like to view those captions, they're available by clicking the link in your chat box, and I will send it again right now for anyone who might have missed it, and you can click on that and follow all of the captions they've already started. And we are going to switch to Diana now. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for participating in our webinar about our congregation's efforts to challenge the stigma of mental illness in our community. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what led me to become interested in mental illness. I'm also going to talk about the various steps that I went through, or our congregation went through actually, to decide what it was we needed to do. And then I'm going to tell you about the different programs and activities that we've done over the years, and then take a look back at some things that we've learned, from our efforts, and what we have planned for the coming years. My story began with a good friend's son's suicide, and many of you may have read my blog describing that event and heard about, just how stunned I was that she had kept his illness a secret, and really not comprehending why she had never shared the story of his illness with me. The next sort of significant event in my life was when I was working as a volunteer with Women of Reform Judaism, and I was an area director then for Pacific District. And one of the roles that I had was to check in with different sisterhoods in our area and find out, about significant programs that they were involved with. And that's when I met Jane Marcus from Beth Am in Los Altos Hills. And she told me about a program that they had just completed doing on mental illness. They had had a conference and was very successful, and they were dealing with some of the same issues that I had certainly witnessed with my friend. So she helped me see that there were things that congregations could do to help open up the communication with families and individuals with mental illness, to be more inclusive, to learn what they need, and to share, the compassion of our community. So in 2007, I met with our rabbis and a little bit later with our temple board to gather the support to start something at Temple Isaiah. And Rabbi Shanks became my supervising rabbi, and she put me in touch with the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center and Rabbi Eric Weiss. And she also suggested that I contact the URJ. Then Rabbi Adress was, I think, heading Jewish Family Concerns. I don't remember the exact name of the department, but he had a West Coast contact, Rebecca Schwartz. And so I contacted her, and we talked quite a bit about the different options that we had. I also had a congregant at Temple Isaiah that had suffered mental illness most of her life, and it had even caused an estrangement with her family. And she was very interested in working with me as well. So that was sort of the beginning of our committee. From there, I decided that I should reach out to our Jewish community. So I contacted B'nai Tikva, B'nai Shalom, and Beth Hayam. These are local communities, not all Reform synagogues, and asked them if they wanted to participate. And each of the rabbis joined the committee, and they found interested congregants, sometimes a therapist that was part of their congregation, to also participate in the committee. I also reached out to Jewish Family and Children's Services and Jewish Federation of the East Bay, and they also provided a person to help us with our committee. And within my own congregation, we let it be known we were looking for interested people. I received some family members showing interest, and some therapists, and a couple of psychiatrists. I also reached out to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they put me in touch with a family member from our community, and she actually joined our committee as well, and currently is one of my co-chairs. And so that formed the basis of this committee. And it was very large and sometimes almost unwieldy to handle everybody's needs and ideas. And it took us nearly a year to sort of settle on what it was we needed to do in our community and how we wanted to go about it, and then finding a location and a date and so forth. It was pretty challenging. So we finally got it on the calendar for January of 2009. And we hosted it at Temple Isaiah. It was a half-day interactive mental health conference. We started with a panel. Rabbi Shanks did the Devar Torah, and I had my NAMI representative, Karen Cohen. She spoke as a family member on the panel, and then I had a person from NAMI's In Our Own Voice who had severe mental illness, a young man with schizophrenia, talked to us about his experience with mental illness when he was a college student, and his very long journey toward recovery. I also included a member of Contra Costa Mental Health. I believe she was head of the mental health department at that time, Joanne Freeman, and she gave us sort of an overview of what is happening with mental illness treatment in today's world. After the panel discussion, we broke up into discussion groups, and they had pre-registered for discussion groups, and we had decided that we had family members of children and teens. We had adults. We wanted a family group that focused on midlife and older adults. Then there were the caregivers, and there are caregivers that take care of their adult children or their family members with mental illness, and then there are also the caregivers of a spouse or an aging parent. And so we had those two groups, and we also had a discussion group for survivors of suicide. And so we broke up into those discussion groups, and we had put a rabbi and a mental health professional, most of them from our committee, but we went back to our congregations, selected educators, cantors. We also had a rabbi volunteer from our Jewish home for aging adults. So we had enough rabbis to participate as facilitators, as well as a mental health professional to pair with them for each of the discussion groups. We also included a scribe in the room, and most of those also came from our committee. So many of the volunteers on the committee actually sat in the different discussion groups and took notes. And then once the discussion was over, everybody went back into the sanctuary, and we had a healing center put on by Rabbi Weiss, and all of the scribes met with Rebecca Schwartz from the URJ. And she basically condensed all of their findings into a effective report to be able to share back to the conference before we finished. And we had about 200, maybe a little more people attending the conference. So it was a significant undertaking. But it was very interesting what we found. Each of the groups basically told us the same thing. They felt isolated and alone. They felt ignored by the Jewish community, that they did not feel that they fit in many cases. They were ashamed of the fact that they suffered with mental illness and really wanted some way to be included. They needed a place to reveal their stories in safety and in confidence. And they also wanted an opportunity to explore their spirituality. And that was the common theme throughout. There were others that were interested in things like advocacy. The state of mental health care was pretty frustrating and certainly difficult for those beginning, and they wanted some help figuring it out. Some of them wanted us to advocate. Others wanted to have us include them in our volunteer activities at the temple with some kind of outreach, because they not necessarily felt that they could reach out to us without help. So these were the next steps that Rebecca actually posted on the whiteboard at the conference, that these are things that we as a community can do. We can create support groups. We can include visits and meals and transportation via our caring committees to people with mental illness. We can solicit volunteers, and we can also embark on some kind of advocacy work. Social action through legislation and funding issues. We can give respite to our caregivers. We can provide a means of connection to our community resources. And we can begin to create more visibility within our own congregations through temple newsletters and programs. And it was also recognized that we can make steps to create a more inclusive state during Shabbat with blessings, Aliot, and Mishaberes. So the next steps document that I just shared with you became sort of our template of what we were going to do. And it seemed like we set up another committee date with our committee to explore what we wanted to do first. But it became obvious that we really needed to create those safe spaces that people needed and invite them to come and share their stories. And we weren't really experts at knowing how to start a support group. So we enlisted Jewish Family and Children's Services. And they actually helped us start it by doing some outreach to our community to find 8 families or so to start the group. We set it up under, I think it was 8 weeks. They had a set kind of programming that was going to happen at each of the 8 weeks. And we went ahead and did that shortly after the conference. I think by March we had it on the calendar. The things that we learned from that were that, number one, the HIPAA laws that require therapists and certainly Jewish Family and Children's Services to provide confidentiality didn't really allow us to see firsthand what was happening in the group, number one. And number two, we didn't really understand if it met their needs. It was a very pleasing 8-week program, but it was isolated to just those families. So we really wanted to go forward with a lay-led support group for family members as a start that was really more of a social sharing group. So we found a couple of people within our own committee. The family member from NAMI was actually trained in family to family as well, Karen Cohen. So she volunteered right away to be one of the facilitators. And then I had another family member from my congregation who had an adult daughter with mental illness, and she also and she's also a therapist, so she was ideal. So the two of them took up the role as facilitators for the group. And we advertised it through the entire Jewish community. We were advertising at Jewish Family and Children's Services at each of the participating congregations. And we also advertised through NAMI so that we had some non-Jewish members, certainly at the start of our groups, also attend our support groups. And while we were starting the support groups, we also were working to with some of the next step items that we had on our list. We began a monthly newsletter called Pitach Libenu News, Monthly News. And in that newsletter, we would provide information not only about the support group that we were starting, but sometimes we showcased speakers that were presenting information that might be of value to the community at the NAMI monthly meeting. And then we began also to bring speakers into our congregation on topics that would maybe draw a broader audience than just those people with mental illness and therapists and psychologists that are in the field. We wanted to somehow engage the broader community. So we had a person in our congregation whose daughter and granddaughter had written a book on eating disorders. So she was they were one of our first speakers, and it did bring in a very large group of our congregation to come and see and hear this presentation. But we also did presentations on depression, anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy, and we also had a psychiatrist professor from Berkeley come in and talk to us about his experience with a father with severe mental illness, and that led him obviously to study the field, and he talked a lot about the stigma of mental illness. All of those programs were well attended, and it was something that took a lot of work and a lot of volunteers to put on. We actually even moved some of those presentations to some of the other synagogues so that Temple Isaiah was not the only one showcasing programs on mental illness. We also developed a website. We put a page on Temple Isaiah's website that was the Patak Libenu page, and it told the story of the conference and of the committee, and it also listed information about the support groups, and occasionally we changed it to provide information on the different programs that we were putting on. We also developed an independent website called openourhearts.net that we linked to the Temple website, but we needed a website that wasn't specific to Temple Isaiah for our partnering congregations to feel comfortable using and advertising. So we still have that website, and it has a list of resources as well, and it's still in use today. One of the next steps that we did was a clergy and synagogue leadership training. And this next step really came out of many of the discussions that we had in our committee meetings prior to the original conference. We had rabbis comment about the fact that it was sometimes difficult to understand where spiritual counseling begins and where therapy starts, I guess you could say, or where spiritual counseling ends and therapy begins. And they wanted a little bit more clarification on what their role working with people with mental illness and their family could be. So Rabbi Shanks put me in touch with the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center again, and working with Rabbi Eric Wise. We ended up putting together a half-day leadership retreat for the clergy, and we decided to invite clergy from all of the local congregations. And we ended up with about, I think it was 37, maybe closer to 40, 37, 38, something like that, attendees. Over half of them were clergy, and the others were synagogue leaders, and sometimes they were, the temple president, sometimes they were the executive directors of the congregations, and some of the attendees were just interested congregants. And the congregations that we invited were from all movements of Judaism. So we ended up holding the retreat at a retreat site, and we provide kosher meals, and it was very, I would say, spiritually rewarding to me to participate in that conference. They learned the needs of families and individuals. They separated therapy from spiritual care and support. They discussed scriptures, And we also did some role playing and discussed scenarios. The one part of the conference that I took away and still think about many times when I'm talking to families with mental illness was that adults living with severe mental illness and their families grieve very differently than a family that loses a child from an illness, physical illness. That it's a very long process, and that there are many, many stages of grieving as they grapple with just the struggle of recognizing that the child that they knew most of their life is not the same person who is now an adult. And that in this terrible illness, that there may be long periods of time where they cannot even see that loved one. So it helped them understand that grief counseling is an ongoing process. It took us a few years to find the courage and maybe the energy to start another group, but we knew we needed one for people with mental health challenges or those that suffer with mental illness. And the way we went around about it this time, because we were at least 2 years into at post the conference time, we had identified some people that were very active and interested in mental illness in our congregation. So we asked them to participate in a group, a core group, to help us define what a support group would look like for people with mental illness. And we had some ideas. There was a little bit of fear even amongst the people themselves about whether, we had talked about a peer-led group, and then we talked about having one of the family facilitators lead the group, and none of that sounded right. So we ended up deciding to hire a therapist to work with us, at least for the initial period. We had enough money for about a year, and we were only meeting monthly for an hour and a half, so it wasn't a significant financial investment. And so that's how we began. And after a year, we realized, well, two things. I had received lots of phone calls over the years from people within our congregation asking and volunteering to help with P'tach Libenu. And one woman was very interested in actually helping, maybe running a group. So I talked to her more seriously about it to see if she was willing to take on a long-term commitment, and she was. So now I have a volunteer therapist that helps lead the group. I've been a co-facilitator since the beginning, and enjoy the groups very much. And when one of us is not able to be there to facilitate the group, the other one is able to handle it just fine. We've bonded, all of us in the group. It's grown over the years. We get new members a couple of times a year. We have about 10 members now that are regulars, and on any given month we will have anywhere between 4 and 8 of those showing up. Vacations, other commitments all seem to take their toll. But it's lovely because we're all friends, and they seem to welcome new members when they join, and it's working very nicely. Right after we started that group, Rabbi Shanks came to us in our support group and said that she thought it was time to do a Kol Nidre sermon, and that she would like to have stories from the members of the support group to help her as she formed that sermon. So many of our members of the group wrote their stories, and I reached out to those that hadn't come to our support group that I knew had stories to tell as well. And they helped provide the information for her sermon. But her sermon really reached out to the entire congregation to be more inclusive and sensitive and aware to people with mental illness, that we still have a situation in most congregations where we rush out the door with, meals for people that have physical crises in their lives. But we haven't yet even got a communication network in place to know when somebody has a mental illness crisis, and that we need to be more forthcoming as individuals that are facing mental health crises, as well as be more compassionate and empathetic when people do have the courage to share their story. So the Kol Nidre sermon was wonderful. Everybody in the congregation, I think, had a very heartfelt moment, recognizing the needs that we were still pretty much ignoring. And so shortly after that sermon, one of the young women in our support group told us that she actually wanted to come out to the community about her mental illness at Shabbat service during Simcha time. So within just a few weeks, she got up at Simcha time and she told the congregation the story of her mental illness, that she was sharing that information because it was her 4th year anniversary of wellness or recovery. And she was very excited and proud to be a part of this community that was so welcoming and open to her. And that was a very pivotal moment for at least the people that participated in Shabbat that night. They all came up to her during Oneg and congratulated her, shared their stories, and otherwise made her feel very valued and welcomed. Over the years, we also, took a look at our religious and teen schools to make sure that our kids were safe and find ways to connect with Judaism on their level and their capability. And I really have to say that we have a marvelous group of clergy, educators, and cantor who had already met the needs so efficiently. It was amazing. We had at that time different tracks being designed and developed and slowly introduced to religious school that allowed kids with learning differences to be able to learn Judaism through different modes of learning, like nature, art, music, and dance, which they could sign up for at the beginning of, when they are signing up for religious school. There were also programs going on during teen school to teach about bullying, cyberbullying, and other types of bullying, and they modeled inclusion behavior. We also heard firsthand a story from one of our past religious school students of her journey with severe mental illness. They came to the teen school, or she came to the teen school, and they had a program where she shared the details of her illness and her recovery. They've also included some mental illness education so that they recognize the symptoms in themselves and in others, so that they won't remain silent if somebody needs help. So where do we go from here? What have we learned? The stigma of mental illness continues to be a barrier to participation and action. Some people still stay away from participating in the group. I receive telephone calls from individuals that want to talk to me privately. I encourage them to come to the groups, but they would rather have the help that they need over the phone than having to walk through the congregation properties and into a classroom where we hold our support group. And many are probably still silent. Congregants that have not been impacted by mental illness still tend to ignore the topic. And we have new congregants joining each year just because of the B'nai Mitzvah process. And so our efforts are endless in terms of educating people. And one of my latest programs that I am supporting is Mental Health First Aid. It's a program that actually was designed out of Australia, but they have an American version. And it's a full day of education, but it teaches the participants enough about mental illness to be sensitive to the symptoms, to find ways to approach people that are non-threatening and will perhaps diffuse a situation. Certainly, it also teaches them how to take action and help them. And I've always, or I think about mental health first aid as a little bit like CPR. Many of us attended CPR classes at some time in our life, and we know that if we ever have to, we could probably take action and help save somebody's life. But hopefully we never will have to. And that's the way I feel about mental health first aid. This is just tools that everybody really should have to help them recognize the symptoms of mental illness, changes in behavior that could be signals that something's not quite right. So instead of just thinking that this too will pass, this is just a phase, that you will be wise enough to ask and to take action if necessary. So that's one of the things that I'm really hoping will help change our congregation. We have congregants that are very willing now to let a rabbi know when they're in crisis. One of the problems, though, that we do have is getting them to take the next step, and that is to reach out to either attend a group or to ask even the caring committee to send them meals or to help them with transportation. We're working on it. We have done some, but it is not just a natural part of our system. Also, mental illness can be messy. We don't always, well, we don't want to do things that cause harm, but sometimes our actions might. And I did lose a good friend, and you know, I betrayed a trust by sharing some information with her husband, and she has not forgiven me, and because of that, she has further isolated herself. So, you know, there are sometimes things don't work the way your good intentions plan. Some of the other things that we've had trouble with is keeping the energy and the volunteers flowing. You know, we've been doing this for a long time now, and it's mostly the same people that started with us at the beginning. And it's hard to keep flowing new volunteers into our work. Funding's also an issue. Early on, we went after grants and had a surprising response and a significant amount of money to help us start all of our efforts and programs. We actually even got a grant from the URJ. We got a Codamer grant funding, which I partnered with Beth and Jane Marcus. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. So what we're doing now is we are thinking about partnering with Brain and Behavior Research Foundation. And they are a foundation, so their objective is to raise money so that they can give it to researchers that will come up with solutions to mental illness problems. And so we are thinking of a joint fundraiser, and we don't know what that's going to look like, but that's one of the things that we're working on. Mental health first aid, we're still continuing to work on that. We're also going to continue with our programming. I think that beside mental health first aid, there are some interested programs that we could reach a larger audience on. Autism still has a significant impact on our community, and I think that there is some new information out there that we can bring a speaker in to tell us about. And mindfulness and meditation is another area that we're taking a look at. We're going to do 3 workshops in the fall, and we're going to focus on our religious school parents. And it'll just give us some tools to help deload the stress of the world. Before taking your questions, I would like to share a couple of tools available for your use. Going back to the grant that the URJ gave both Beth and Temple Isaiah to jointly work on a project that Jane and I had in mind. She calls it one-on-one and one-on-many. And basically what we ended up doing is working with the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center again. Thank you again, Rabbi Eric Weiss. And we produced, this is a little pamphlet. We wanted it for people like our caring committee that would allow them to have some tips on what they need to do or say, or how to prepare for a visit to somebody with mental illness. The other item that we produced is the one-on-many, is a basically mental illness support group guide. And what it takes is the information that we have learned from all of our different groups, not only the ones in my congregation, but the one at Beth and the ones that we visited both at NAMI and at some of the churches in our area, to see what they are doing and how they set up their support groups. And then we put all that information together in this guide along with some tools and resources. Both of these items will be up on the Disability Inclusion's website along with this webinar once they do what they need to do to make it go up there. And they will have these items for you to download. And you just download them from your computer onto a normal printer, and with this guide you have to cut it a little bit and fold it and then staple it, but it's a very simple, easy tool, and you'll have the resource right there available for your use. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I think it's now time for questions.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you to Diana for the great presentation, the wonderful webinar, and to all of you for joining us. The best way to go about the questions is to have you type them into the chat box. You'll see a little speech bubble that says chat underneath it. And if you type in the questions to either all panelists, if you want it to be a private question to Diana, or to everyone, Diana will see those on her chat box and she will answer the question. So I'm going to hand it back off to Diana, and please give us your questions, and then I will see you shortly.
Okay, the question that I've received is that there is so much stigma in the community that they are that it's hard for them to get people to come to their workshops, and I think that's a very typical, normal condition in our communities. You know, I think that if you start by presenting topics on things that have an interest to a wide group of people, that that could be a very helpful way to go. The types of things like we did on eating disorders, that was really well attended by younger families. And we also participated directly with the religious school to see if they would sponsor it as well. The other kind of thing that may be helpful is something like CBT, which is a program that deals with changing the way you think about things, how you approach about things, which quite frankly every one of us could probably use. It helps keep our inner thoughts from telling us how bad we are or how weak we are. Those kinds of things appeal to a large group. The other one that appealed to a large group was anxiety. And you know, most of us have had various experiences with anxiety. And again, that one brought a lot of the mainstream population of our congregation out. There's also something that our rabbi has been doing for about 2 years now, and that's teaching Musar. And for those of you that don't really understand it, and I'm not really in a position to educate you all on it, but it's a belief that there are several different characteristics like compassion and empathy and even silence that are parts of our behavior that in Judaism can be either very good or very bad, but there is somewhere in the middle, or whatever the balance is, the right thing. And so we've been teaching Musar on an ongoing way for these 2 years, about quarterly. She has a Shabbat presentation, and then she has encouraged all of us that participate in the Musar to form groups. And those groups allow us to have many support groups. They're not mental illness support groups, but it's amazing how those 4 or 5 people become very bonded and very open to sharing very personal stories about their lives. So those are a couple of ways. Hopefully that's helpful. I have another question. I think the question was, how does a person feel excluded from a congregation if they don't tell anybody that they have a mental illness? Well, I think what happens is that they are so ashamed, just like my friend whose son committed suicide, that people will judge them for having mental illness in their family or for being depressed. And, they're tired of people saying, oh, come on, let's go for a walk, get up off the couch, you'll feel better once we get moving, that they don't tell people. They get judged, they feel shame, and unfortunately, there's a huge amount of guilt associated with it. Did I do something wrong as a parent? Should I have done something different to make this go away? When I saw the signs, should I have done something? So I think that the reason that we have so much isolation is, quite frankly, because mental illness has so much stigma, and they feel that if they share that they are less. And certainly in our Jewish community, who normally hears things like, my son's going to Harvard or Stanford or some wonderful Ivy League college, and you're sitting there suffering because your son or daughter just came home with severe anxiety or depression and is in his room or her room and is unable to function. It's not something that we have traditionally handled very well. Okay, let's see. Do I have any others? Is there a specifically Jewish component in our support groups? Yes. When we started the family group, we started with a prayer, and it's actually in the mental illness guide. And it was written by Rabbi Kukla from the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center. And it's a Mishabera healing prayer. So it's in here, it can be found. And we also close the support group by singing Debbie Friedman's Mishabera. In the support group for people with mental health challenges, we have played around with several different ways. We've started with a prayer. One of our congregants really likes the morning prayer, the Moda Ani, and he came and basically taught it to all of us that weren't doing it. And we started our meetings for several months doing the Moda Ani and talking about what it meant to each of us. So far, we haven't really done another healing service for mental illness, but we've been thinking about it, and whether it becomes a special Shabbat service with a healing for mental illness, something like that. Okay. Do you think people are more willing to come forward when they learn that mental illness is a physical illness that can be seen in the brain? Mental illness has a physical basis, and it can, in many cases, can be seen in the brain medically. I think that's probably a new thought that is not really completely addressed. Even we're getting there. Certainly, we've even actually recognized the genetic connection, and we don't understand all of the triggers of why the siblings, some may not activate whatever that mental illness gene is, and but others will. I think that education will always help reduce the stigma and the shame and the isolation. It just isn't out there. I'm wondering if it's possible to obtain a copy of Rabbi Shank's sermon. I'll ask her. Send me an email if you'd like, or you can contact me. It's openourhearts.net. My email is diana@openourhearts.net. That will get to me. Oh, and I have a couple more. how do you get community people to buy into addressing this issue? Well, I think the numbers will speak for themselves. I've heard various different numbers of people that get mental illness in a lifetime, but it's somewhere around 4 or 5. That's a very, very high number. And it's something like 1 in 12 or 1 in 20 that will develop a serious mental illness in their community. So if you just take a look at the numbers, a congregation of 2,000 people has about 400 people with mental illness and about 100 to 200 that probably have serious mental illness that's persistent. So that's an awful lot of silence. Those people are sitting, hiding, and not sharing their stories. So I think that if you begin addressing it publicly, you will find those people. Okay, one more. How many families in your congregation and how many are in your core organizing committee? Okay, our congregation has about just under 1,000 families, and we had probably 10 people from our congregation on the committee and at least another 10 from all of those other congregations and agencies that we involved. Okay. I got another one. Let's see. With others, how has that been? Oh, the collaboration with other synagogues. Am I still doing it? Yes, to some extent. Certainly not with the great energy that we started. And there have been a lot of rabbinical changes in all but one of my partnering congregations. After the clergy and leadership retreat, we tried to establish a network where we followed up with emails about once a quarter and where we would share ideas and stories. It didn't go too well. We had a couple of rabbis that participated, but by and large, most people didn't respond to our interest. We did have one rabbi who did a sermon on mental illness also at the high holidays, and he shared that with all of us. And let's see, do I have anything else? More about that. I still am contacting the other synagogues right now because I'm looking for a partner to do mental health first aid. And I'm hoping that they will be willing to help share not only the space in the class, but the cost of delivering it. Advocacy work. I didn't talk about the advocacy work that we've done, but yes, we've dabbled at it. I can't say we've gone, overboard with it. The first thing that we did was we did a Mitzvah Day project over at one of our board and care facilities, and we planted a garden and we brought donations. The next couple of things that we did was write letters and to help the Board of Supervisors vote to secure a property that was available for to become a board and care. And we were having some difficulty with the community, and we were wanting to get their approval and support to do it. We also advocated fairly strongly for assisted outpatient treatment, which is currently actually been approved and is operating in Contra Costa County. And the news coming out of it so far is very encouraging. It's a good thing. All right, is that it? Thank you very, very much for tuning into this program. If you have any interest in contacting me directly, you can do it, like I say, through the email address that's through our website, or you can also always go directly to Temple Isaiah in Lafayette, California. They'll find me. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Diana, for this webinar. Thank you all for tuning in and for your great questions. Rabbi Shanks's sermon is up on the Disabilities Inclusion Learning Center, located at disabilitiesinclusion.org, but we will also post it along with the other resources that Diana showed during this webinar. It should be up in about a week. We will email all of you once the webinar is up. It will be open captioned and have all of the great resources and everything Diana mentioned. We also wanted to make sure to tell you we hope you will join us on June 20th for our next mental health learning opportunity call. That is with Dr. Mark Salzer from Temple University, and it relates to including individuals with psychiatric disabilities. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch with us at jrobbins@urj.org. That's JROBBINS@urj.org. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next call.